Thank you for that intro, David. I'm really glad to be back at Optic All-Stars. Big thank you to B&H for hosting us in this virtual community, and a thank you to Lindblad, who I've been working with for the last 6 years. Today, I wanted to talk about why we photograph, what brings us to this medium and brings us together. A lot of times it's as simple as we all simply like to pick up our camera and get lost in the moment and make images. We love that technical part of making images. Sometimes we take pictures because we want to show that we've been to a place. We want to show the experience of travel, of being in other locations, and the beauty. Sometimes we take pictures to show emotion, such as pure joy that this woman's showing standing in the misters in Slovakia. Or sometimes it's because we're in front of a beautiful situation, just pure beauty, the sunset in Galapagos off the bow of the National Geographic Endeavour 2. A lot of times we take pictures and we find something interesting or intriguing, like this pattern of holes in a leaf in the Amazon in Peru. Or perhaps it's the juxtaposition of storks on ancient Roman columns in Morocco. But I think overall, we share because we create community, just like we are all here now in this community with Optic and sharing our love of photography. But whether you're sharing after the fact or in the moment, I think photography can bring us together. And what is so beautiful to me about photography, and I think to all of us, is that humans are storytellers by nature. When we have conversations with each other, we're communicating by telling each other stories. There's an author named Jonathan Gottschall. He wrote an entire book about this, and I just want to share this quote. "We are as a species addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night telling itself stories." And I found that so fascinating, and it is true. And another thing that's really interesting with storytelling is that when we tell each other stories, we're tapping into that sensory part of our brain. And as visual people, we all can relate to that. Whereas when we're relating facts or data, it can be very powerful and hard-hitting, but it doesn't go to the same receptors in our brain. So just even thinking about, if I wanted to tell you the story about one of my favorite days in Alaska when I was sailing with Lindblad, I would be using my words, my adjectives to describe what it felt like, what the experience was like. I probably would start by telling you that as we navigated up Tracy Arm in Southeast Alaska, it was a rainy day, it was full of mist, the clouds were just hanging to the sides of the mountains. And as we approached the Sawyer Glacier, which was our final destination for the day, we lowered the zodiacs and we started exploring. And the sun came out and it would light up parts of the granite rock face, and we would navigate the zodiacs through the beautiful bits of ice from the glacier face. And then the sun was coming through the clouds. It was like nature's spotlight, and it just would hit the ice and make it glow in the most amazing way in front of the glacier. And everyone was just astounded when the glacier would calve, and we'd hear that crack and rumble and even feel the waves moving our zodiac as the repercussion went across the fjord. And then we had a rainbow, the finale of a rainbow. And I think it was at this point that I asked to be let off on some of the ice so I could just stay here forever, because it was just the most spectacular day. So even in just speaking those words to you, I'm using a lot of descriptive words. And if you're out taking pictures, just stop for a minute and think about how you would tell this story through words, and envision how you can make images that would match those words. And I think that's a helpful way to be able to bring your story home through the visual medium. It's very, very important to capture with intention. I spent a lot of time in Europe in 2019 in the summer, and it was just astounding how many people would arrive to a beautiful place, a famous destination, and immediately pull up their camera and put it to their face and experience the world through the camera, but without even stopping to look. So I want to give you some tips today to just remind you to be an intentional storyteller, to move from just taking pictures to creating or making photographs. So we don't want to be the casual clicker. We want to be a photographer with a voice and a message to share. And part of doing that is, like I said, it's slowing down. It's becoming an observer. And I think when we go into a situation, sometimes I think as photographers, we feel an urgency when we get to a place to quick make some images. We have to make a good image. We need to start taking pictures. But if you can just remind yourself to pause and take a second and observe the situation, whether it's observing a market like we see in Morocco here, or observing animals doing a certain kind of behavior, you start to notice what is happening in a different way. You notice the important things, you notice the best scenes, the best moments to take pictures. So I arrived at this market. This is in Fez in the Medina, and it is, if you've been there, it's in crazy chaos. It's wonderful chaos, but it's almost too much. So I was very intentional as I roamed this part of the market where it was fresh produce. And I found this scene where I thought everything worked together. I had a beautiful background. I love how the tarps matched the blue that the man was wearing and how colorful his produce was. And so now here's where you're going to see some of my dirty laundry. In this presentation, I'm showing you some photos that didn't work, just to give you an examples and juxtapositions. So this is what it looked like right around where this man's stand was. So there was a lot of options that I could have chosen from. And you can see there's different lighting. And so when I go around and I'm observing, I'm looking for a light that works in my best interest and scenarios that work in my best interest. And then I go and spend my time there. And because I took the time to photograph that man, then I ended up having another opportunity to make more of his portrait. Once we didn't share any language, but somehow I made a portrait of him, and he picked up this can of daisies that he had next to him. So be selective. So I kind of touched on that just now, but when you walk into a situation, don't just stop where you're planted. Be choosy, be picky, start to learn what makes a really good photograph by understanding that I think we've all been in places where it's really beautiful or interesting in front of us, but it doesn't always translate into a good photograph when you click the shutter and freeze it in time. And when I say good photograph, I mean interesting, I mean engaging, something that you want to look at. So this is in Galapagos on Genovesa Island. There's an area that has these beautiful green mangroves. And every time we go there, there are the red-footed boobies nesting in the trees. And I just love the juxtaposition of the color of the red feet against the green of the mangrove. But if you just walk up and pick an arbitrary bird or stop where you've planted, it's not always going to be the best photograph to be made. So just by shifting around, I was able to find a better vantage point for myself, because oftentimes they're nestled in the back of the trees and you need to find a clear shot. So it's being selective, being picky, knowing when a scene merits pulling up your camera or maybe moving around and working for it. In this example, I saw this beautiful lighting on this foliage. I love the way it looked, but I didn't just pick any of the foliage. I was very intentional to choose this bit that had the darker shadow behind it, because I knew that that blackness would make the foliage stand out more in my image. So letting light lead. If you can be a student of light and start to understand what makes effective light, and I don't use the terminology good or bad light, because I think that there's light that's just better suited for different purposes. So if you were to go and take my photograph in the middle of the day in high contrast light, I don't think either of us would be very happy, because I would have very dark shadows and lots of contrast on my face, and it wouldn't be flattering. So for example, this is in Patagonia in Chile. We went to this glacier. It was an overcast day, very, very flat light. It does not work for this landscape. The only way I am trying to create depth here is by the physical elements in the picture with the rocks, with the people in the background and the glacier going up the mountain. But I knew that this lighting wasn't great for the landscape shot, for the overall image, but it was great for a tight shot that showed texture and color, because overcast light will saturate the color more, and it just really made the texture of the glacier pop out. In Patagonia as well, this was near Torres del Paine, I was with some gauchos after a horse ride, and they invited us back for some mate. And this was where I was sitting when he began to pour the hot water into the mate. And you can see that there's this window behind him, there's backlighting. It's not really the best scene. And so I decided to move to the side, and I had to give up on the portrait because the way the lighting was working, it didn't quite work with his head and to get something flattering. So I just decided I would make a detail of him pouring the hot water into the tea. So I let the light tell me where to go. And I think good photographers, especially travel photographers, are really great puzzle solvers. And I'm not going to call it a problem. Sometimes we get into situations and it's, you know, I'm on assignment, I'm in a place, it's probably could be the only time I'm there. Maybe I only have one shot at it, and I am dealt the cards that I'm dealt. The lighting that I'm given, whatever situation's in front of me with the animals, the people, whatever is happening. And if it's not working the way that I want it to, I need to solve that puzzle. And I think instead of approaching it as a problem and thinking of it as a puzzle, it becomes more engaging and more of a fun challenge to accomplish. I was on assignment in Asheville for National Geographic Traveler, and I had scouted this place. It was called Black Balsam Knob, and this is out on the Blue Ridge Parkway. It was my last morning to be able to go photograph along the parkway. And so I'd scouted this the day before. I wanted to show up here, and my vision was beautiful sunrise, you know, up on this mountain. It was going to be fabulous. But when I showed up after driving through the dark in the pre-dawn light, and I arrived here, it was pea soup. This was not the moment that I arrived. This was much later in the day. And so I went into plan B mode. What else can I do? And I knew that there was a viewpoint nearby that would show all of the mountains layered and stacked up and show the Blue Ridge Mountains in their glory. So I went down and I started working on something different. And I knew that there was an iconic mountain, and I was able to include the iconic mountain, which is on the right, with this fabulous light that I ended up getting for about 1 entire minute. That was as long as the sky turned cotton candy pink. And then after that was over, the light went flat again, and I decided to go back up to the original place that I showed you just a few images ago. And then I was able to also make this kind of image. So by viewing it as a puzzle, I just kept shifting it, changing the way I was thinking, going from plan A to B to C to D. So just keep trying. There's always a photo to be made. It's just not always the photo that we have in our mind. So allowing the light to dictate what was happening really helped me shift my mindset and find something new. So I was a photo editor for National Geographic Traveler for 7 years, and I'm often finding images that work in an essay, work in tandem together to be able to tell a story. And I love that about being a visual storyteller, is how we can group images together to give a whole picture of a place. But I have to admit, I was a little bit jealous of writers, because a writer can go into a place and see it and capture the essence in a tight, well-edited paragraph. And for a photographer, I don't think it's that easy. You can't just show up to a place and always find the right scene that tells everything about a place and captures its essence. You can get the individual images and we can link them together and do the essay, but I'm always, as a photographer, looking for images that speak without me having to give them a caption. So they have unique elements of a place that you can just guess by looking. that give sense of place. So here, most of us probably would guess this is Asia. Maybe you'll guess that it's Japan. So I was lucky enough to see these two women. I actually had met them just a little bit before I took this picture and had photographed them in another place. And they had come from a wedding, and that's why they were wearing these beautiful traditional kimono. And I'm on Miyajima Island, known for the deer that they have wandering free there. And I knew that the deer come up to people. And so when I had rounded the corner and I saw these two women looking at the deer, I knew the deer was going to come up. So I have the element of the traditional dress. I have the deer that's typical of the island. And even in the background, you can see that we're out on an island. So it just starts to tell a lot of meaning in one photo without me having to explain so much. But does it read? This is something I'm always asking people when they're taking pictures. When you freeze this moment in time and you show it to a complete stranger, will they understand what is happening in the picture? So always thinking about that. I was in Antarctica with Lindblad, and we were at a place called Brown Bluff. And there was this amazing behavior happening with these Adelie penguins. And what was happening is it seemed like there was this endless conveyor belt of Adelies coming down from their colony and coming along the water's edge, where they would then congregate. They would gather in these groups and they would work up the courage. One of these little fellows was, or could have been a gal, would come up to the water's edge and take a peek out and suss out if maybe there was any predators in the water, such as a leopard seal. And then that one brave penguin would just jump into the water, and then her friends would dogpile in after. And I just loved this behavior. I thought it was so fascinating. And then I was able to make this image that told more of the complete story, that read, if I showed it to a stranger, you can see the behavior of the penguins all jumping into the water together in these large groups. I wanted to mention FOMO, fear of missing out. I think that this is something that everyone struggles with from time to time. And I just want to remind you to do a check with yourself when you're out shooting and ask yourself why you are taking pictures. I think we've all been in this situation where we're on a trip or in a workshop or potentially just at a very popular destination where there's lots of photographers, and you hear somebody's motor drive going off and you think, oh my gosh, I should be taking pictures, or you start taking pictures and not always with intention. So ask yourself, why am I taking those pictures? Or am I being more selective because I'm going to take less pictures, I'm going to take them in the right moment? Maybe I don't need to take 1,000 pictures of the bird flying by. Maybe I'll take pictures of the bird when it's in the most interesting positions. Or maybe you'll look at the setting and you'll see that it's a backlit sky, and you'll know that you already photographed that bird the day before and you have a beautiful image. So you don't need to be making an image at this moment when the light isn't optimum. It's a personal question, but it's just something that I like to remind people to think about, because when we get in these groups as photographers, we kind of all get shutter happy. And just to remember that it's okay not to pick up your camera and take a picture if it's not the picture or story that you want to tell. And this is one of my favorite quotes: comparison is the thief of joy. As visual people, I think we see each other's artwork or each other's photographs a lot, and we sometimes think that we've missed out, or we are not trying. I wish I would have tried that. I wish I would have gotten that shot. And I just want to remind you to look at other people's work and try to find inspiration in their work instead of comparing, because the more you can learn from others, the better you'll become. Also, not having the right gear is not a good excuse for not making a photograph. This kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about solving the puzzle. I was on the bow of the National Geographic Explorer in Antarctica. I did not have my long lens, but at this moment, this is what I envisioned the people next to me taking. And meanwhile, I had my wide angle lens, and this is the photo that I took. There's always a solution. And I ended up being really grateful that I only had my wide angle lens, because I took this great sense of place picture of Antarctica that shows the icebergs, and it shows the pods of the killer whales surfacing and going through all of the ice. So if you don't have the lens that you think you need, use the lens that you have. Know the limitations of your camera, your gear, know its strengths and its weaknesses. And of course, then if you still don't have the right gear, then you know where to go. You go to B&H. And a final reminder that when you are photographing, ask yourself if the act of photographing is putting you more in the moment or less in the moment. And I have to say, I've answered to both questions. Sometimes I'm fully engaged, like this woman here who's very happy to be photographing these sea lions in Galapagos. And other times I'm getting frustrated with what I'm doing or the bells and whistles on my camera, and I'm not in the moment. So give yourself permission to be in the moment, and also acknowledge if the shot isn't there, to just enjoy the experience. So now I want to talk about sharing the story, because none of us take pictures because we want them to sit on our hard drive or on our cards. And I think a lot of us have been guilty of that. So the way that I would encourage you to prevent that from happening is to give yourself a purpose or goals before you even go out and take pictures. Sometimes, like if I'm on a trip, maybe my goal would be something simple as I'm going to share one photo from every location on my social media, or I'm going to do a photo essay from each destination. Or also you could give yourself themes or long-term projects. So it could be something as simple as everywhere I go, I'm making a portrait of a local, or photographing umbrellas. Or if it's a place you go to often, you could start working more in depth on a long-term project. But having that in mind will help you know the kind of images that you need to shoot, to capture, before you go and actually make those images. And of course, your purpose can always be to build your portfolio and strengthen your visual voice. I think every time we go out and we click shutters, that is what our intention is in the long run, is we're becoming better, we're improving. I wanted to remind you, especially as we're going into the holiday season, we're coming into winter, that we have a lot of time on our hands to pull out things from our archive, to organize our archive. And this is a screenshot from the books module of Lightroom. And I had my mother come along with me on one of my trips to Antarctica. And so for Christmas one year, I made her a book, and it goes day by day with the places that we went and what we did. And then of course I did some really beautiful spreads that were just odes to ice, because I can't frankly get enough of the ice. But to make a book is a wonderful gift to someone else and to yourself, because I think we consume books in a very different way than we do with social media. I've seen my family members pick up the book and go through and take the time to really understand what the experience was like in a way that they don't engage with through social media. Also making calendars, making prints. You want your photos to be seen. You want the stories that you're seeing to be heard. So editing and sharing, as I mentioned, now is the time to organize and edit. Unfortunately, none of us are traveling as much as we'd like to, but it is a wonderful time to sit down and work on the hard drive and organize your files. I don't know if you feel like I do about this, but having all of those images sitting unorganized on my hard drive, it's almost a burden. So go through them, cull them. You don't need 1,000 pictures of a bird in flight. You need to keep the handful of the really good ones. I feel like if I have too many papers in my office, it's overwhelming to me. So I try to have that same mentality when I work on my hard drive and organize all my images. And I do not keep everything. I'm a ruthless photo editor. I used to keep everything, but turns out hard drives are not are not free. They still cost something. So what I do is when I edit images, I use the star rating system, and I rank things up from 0 to the best being 5. And when I finish an entire edit of a set of photos, I then go back and I look at my zeros, and I'll give them a double look, make sure I have not made any mistakes. And then I select all the zeros and I hit delete, and they're gone forever. So it's just feels to me like a little bit of a relief, like recondoing my life and my hard drives. And remember that you are responsible for getting your images seen. You may have taken the best image ever, but if you do not share it with other people, we do not hear that story, and we do not get to appreciate that experience. And a reminder now, during these different times, is to try something new. So since March, I've been trying a few new things, and I photographed some friends' university graduation, and I photographed my new niece. And then I decided to get creative and do a few self-portraits. So here is one of my self-portraits that I took in the spring. And then also, since I was able to be close to home this year, I started a small cut flower farm. And so I've been using my photo skills to build my website for my flower farm and make images to put on social media, and to be able to populate my newsletters and documents. So it's just been a great way to keep using my photography. I'm using it in a new way, using it for new purposes, for the product page when I'm selling arrangements. But I would encourage you to keep shooting, keep making images, find opportunities, even though they may not be what really gets you excited about photography. Maybe you love a certain kind of photography, but go out there, try something new, because I think any experience with photography that you have is going to make you become a better photographer. And I like to tell people that if you can't make a compelling photograph in your own backyard, what makes you think you could make one anywhere else? So why waste an expensive trip learning to become a better photographer? Now is the time to do it close to home, do it in your apartment, do it in your backyard, do it in the city that you live in, and just keep taking pictures, because you're only going to get better. And then when we're able to travel again and get out and see this beautiful world, you're going to be that much better to be able to make images and tell the story of our beautiful world. So I hope that you got some information from that you'll find useful during these days, and have a great time taking pictures. And thank you for listening.